All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Danielle Daly. I am your moderator for today. I'm just going to go over a couple housekeeping items and then I will let Matt introduce himself. Everyone is muted and your cameras are off. Please be sure to use the chat box for any questions, comments, any resources you want to share. You can also use the Q&A, which will come to Matt and I. Please visit our website, icpn.org. You can see all of our upcoming webinars as well as sign up for future mailings. Please give me about 14 days to get your continuing education certificates out. They will come to the email that you have registered with for the webinar. So as long as you clicked on your link, your email address will show up and that is where your continuing education will come to. I will put that information into the chat box for you along with my email address. If you have any questions or comments or concerns, you feel free to reach out to me, but I will go ahead and give it on over to Matt.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you all coming out and spending your afternoon with us today. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get my screen launched here. Give me one moment. Okay, can you guys see the slides? Are we good, Danielle?
Yes, we are good.
All right, perfect. All right, so tell you guys a little bit about myself. So I've been in the field since 2006. I started as a one-to-one DSP working in a crisis home. Moved on to work as a DT instructor, then a Q for about 7 years before I decided to go back to grad school and get my master's in counseling psychology. So now I'm the director of Illinois Crisis Prevention Network. But where a lot of this stuff is going to be somewhat clinical, just know that it wasn't that long ago that I was doing the direct work, and I really do try to keep mindful of what that's like as well. And hopefully some of this will be useful, kind of no matter what everybody's job titles are here. All right, so what we're talking about today is functional analytic psychotherapy. So functional analytic psychotherapy is a process that typically occurs when with a therapist and a client as they attempt to increase the skills needed for deeper social connections. So really, it's about building social connections and the skills necessary for that. So why is social connection so important to humans, and what happens when we lack it? So one of the things we know about the impact of poor relationships is that poor limited relationships are correlated with negative health outcomes comparable to smoking and double that of obesity. So poor relationships, which can mean either conflict or loneliness, lack of relationships, increases the stress hormones in the body, which also decreases the immune system's ability to fight off diseases and can compromise cardiovascular functioning. So data supports its influence, social connected's influence on health issues, from cardiovascular disease to even tuberculosis and schizophrenia, increased risk of those. So social connection it's connected not just to our satisfaction with life, it's actually connected to our physical well-being as well. All right, so why is our health so tied to our social connection? So when we look at the history of the evolution of human beings, we know we're relatively physically weak as a species, we're slow, we're fairly defenseless compared to other species. But where we thrive is because so much of our evolution has centered around our ability to connect to one another. So many of our biological brain resources are committed to our ability to operate within social contexts. This ability to connect is why humans have become the dominant species on the planet, in spite of our physical limitations. It's also why we struggle mightily when we're forced into isolation, because we've literally evolved to be in small groups with one another, strongly connected. All right, so as humans have evolved to connect socially, we primarily evolved to work within small in groups while competing with out groups. So this used to be a much simpler task when humans lived primarily in small hunting and gathering communities. But the modern world now requires us to shift between far more complex groupings than ever in our history as a species. We spend much of our lives sort of moving between all the various in-groups that all of us belong to. And this requires more and more social skill and flexibility, which wasn't always required before. So when we struggle with this, when we lack the skills to be able to do this maneuvering, we know that depression, anxiety, and negative health outcomes are likely to follow. So kind of as we're thinking about that, as we're thinking about social connection and the lack thereof, I know all of us are sitting here thinking about our clients in their group homes, some of them with some community built through the day programs, through park districts, things like that. Many of them lacking much community at all. And often we might be their only social connections in the world. Some of them may even lack family connections. So this is why it's so important for us to not just focus on building the social skills with them, but we actually are the social connection with them. So we'll talk more about how this brand of psychotherapy tries to build the skills while at the same time fostering the actual social connection between the therapist or the staff and the client. So the field of psychology has had countless theories and models of why humans struggle. Functional analytic psychotherapy that we're going to talk about today identifies lack of social connection and ineffective strategies for making those connections as the primary target of intervention. However, this theory was preceded by many other theories, and it draws from many of its predecessors. So I know in this presentation, we've got like 217 people in here. So I know we all come from many different specialities. So I'm going to touch a little bit on the background of sort of how modern therapeutic approaches have fed into functional analytic psychotherapy, hopefully showing the connection between where these previous theories have contributed and how we can sort of make sense. All right, so when a lot of people think of therapy, especially those who aren't in the field, they think of like Sigmund Freud, right? The couch, the sort of early origins of the field. In this model, the psychologist or psychiatrist is in the role of the expert, like a doctor treating a patient. And in this theory, what a person is aware of is only the tip of the iceberg of what's actually going on inside their own minds. There's processes that are playing out subconsciously or unconsciously, sort of like an iceberg where the tip is what you actually see from the person or what the person's aware of. But all of these things are going on underneath the surface, like the bulk of the iceberg would be. So in this model, the expert, the psychologist, is something like the doctor that's looking under the surface, trying to look for these drives that are playing out. So there's later models of this theory that have tried to become more on equal footing, more socially connected, more aware of how social connections sort of play out for mental health. But there's a lot of other theories that came out of this that I think do a really good job with that. We'll focus more on those. So as sort of a reaction to that previous sort of way of doing therapy, there was another school of thought that came out called humanistic therapy. And one of the big changes, or one of the big differences, is that the psychologist moves from expert to sort of a fellow traveler. It's a shift from a doctor sort of curing illness to a fellow traveler using the quality of the relationship to create the conditions under which a person can become closer to the person that they wish to be, closer to the sort of vision they have in their mind of their idealized self. In this model, like no one knows your inner world as well as you can. So the client is the expert on themselves, and the therapist is there to sort of try to unleash what's already there. The focus shifts in the therapy from looking at childhood traumas and things like that, or sort of subconscious, unconscious processes, to the here and now. How are you living today? How do you see yourself versus how you wish to be? The therapist in this model doesn't even practice really much in the way of interventions. They simply stay with the client where they're at, trying to help the person to feel understood in sort of the sacred therapy space. So Carl Rogers, who is one of the founders of this sort of school, believed that under certain conditions, a person has a natural tendency towards growth. And the reason this is important, again, is these factors that he talks about are basically are key components of functional analytic psychotherapy and a lot of other schools of therapy as well now. So what conditions, under what conditions does a person naturally move towards health and self-actualization? So Carl Rogers and the humanistic therapists believe that if the relationship in the room has these elements to them, there's empathy, there's congruence between what's going on inside the therapist and how the therapist is presenting. Are they being authentic? And unconditional positive regard. So the therapist is always on the side of the person that they're with, whether or not they agree with what the person's doing. In the end, they ultimately have unconditional positive feelings towards that person, and they want what's best for them. When these conditions are present, it's the quality of the relationship itself that becomes the healing mechanism. So again, empathy is to truly understand the thoughts and emotions of another from their perspective, to try to do that the best of your ability. Congruence, the counselor is genuine and real, demonstrating alignment between the internal world and how they present. And then an unconditional positive regards. Basically, I accept you as you are. Whether or not we agree with every action, I accept you as a person. So again, many therapeutic approaches, including the one we're going to talk about today, have adopted these three core conditions as a starting point for whatever other interventions they tend to implement. Rogers didn't believe you needed to do anything really beyond this, but a lot of other schools of therapy, including the one we're going to talk about today, take this and then add a lot of other elements to it. All right, so kind of on the other end of the spectrum from the humanistic point of view are the behaviorists. So Dr. B.F. Skinner is one of the sort of foundational figures in this, this school of thought. So behaviorism and humanism were competing theories kind of emerging at about the same time. So humanism took a sort of optimistic view of people's ability to determine their own sort of way under the right conditions, whereas behaviorism posits that free will is itself an illusion, that future actions are shaped by the consequences of previous actions. So basically operant conditioning, which is reinforcement and punishment, shape behavior. So all through our lives, we're either being reinforced for actions, we're being punished for actions, and we slowly over time are changed. Our patterns form based on that. So they didn't see introspection as necessarily useful, for assessing behavior, because they believe that most of what's going on inside a person's mind, if it's real or if it's not real, you can't access it. So what's kind of the point? So they shift from internal cause of behavior suggested by psychoanalysis and humanism to environmental causes of behavior. And we're talking about this because functional analytic psychotherapy, what we're really going to be hitting on today, sort of melds the behaviorism principles with the humanistic principles in a really interesting way. So the basic idea of radical behaviorism is that, this quote here, the simplest and most satisfying view is the thought, is that thought is simply behavior. So thought itself is behavior. So verbal or nonverbal, covert or overt, it's not some mysterious process responsible for behavior, but the thinking is behavior itself. All right, so one practical interventive wing of behaviorism is applied behavior analysis. And I know many of you on here are probably BCBAs, and the rest have mostly have worked with BCBAs. As we know, like BCBAs have become really the dominant force in our field when it comes to interventions for behavioral change. So behavior analysis attempts to change behavior by first assessing the function that the behavior serves. And then you attempt to find socially acceptable alternatives that serve the same function for the person. And a lot of these principles are also what we're going to be doing in functional analytic psychotherapy. So how do we do that? First, you observe and track the consequences of current behaviors. So once you have a theory about what is reinforcing or punishing a behavior, then you can begin to change the equation in hopes of altering the behavior. So we do this through the ABC model. I know a lot of you are very familiar with this. So basically, we're looking at the example of an antecedent. So what is happening? That's the A, antecedent. What is happening before the behavior? And this could be anything. It may not even seem like something that you would naturally think is the cause. You're just looking for what is actually happening before the behavior. And then B is the behavior itself. And then C is the consequence. What happens right after the behavior? And if you can try to find all three of these things, then you can try to unlock the mystery of the behavior and then maybe change it. So looking at an example. So A, antecedent. A person is sitting alone in the living room of the Scylla for 3 hours with a broken television that doesn't work. B, the behavior, the person screams and hits the walls with their fists. C, the consequence, the staff comes down and pleads with them to stop. So as you can probably imagine, most of us in the field, the best intention of coming down and giving the client a lot of attention for breaking the television might be the actual thing that reinforces that behavior. If that's their only method to sort of get social interaction, to get stimulation, then that might become a learned behavior that they repeat in the future. And once you figure that out, then you can try to change the environment. So maybe fixing the television, making sure you're giving attention at appropriate times so that the person is able to get that without needing to do things like punching the wall. Some other ABA techniques are chaining. So for example, putting on a shirt is a series of behaviors that you link together, right? You have to open the drawer, you have to take out the shirt, you have to find the head hole of the shirt, etc. And then you slowly over time chain these behaviors together to create a series of useful behaviors. There's prompting, which is attempting to elicit a behavior through use of verbal or some other method. So you want to cue the person to engage in a behavior. Then there's fading, so reducing reliance on prompting over time. You eventually want the person to not need you to ask them to start, that it just becomes something of a routine. And there's shaping, which is modifying existing behavior over time by slightly reinforcing it in different ways that you can kind of shape it into something more practical, more useful. And then generalization, you want the person to eventually be able to take what they're learning and apply it under different circumstances, different environments, across different people, places. Sometimes somebody might learn something with one particular staff, but then they don't engage in that behavior with any other staff. And then it becomes only moderately useful, right? You want that person to be able to take their behavior and apply it across their life. And we're not going to talk too much about this theory, but there's cognitive behavioral therapy. So this is basically a theory that tries to look at thoughts themselves as challengeable, which behaviorism isn't as much focused on as a point of intervention. So they basically theorize that you can intervene on the behavior itself, like the behaviorists do, but you can also intervene on the thoughts that precede those behaviors, or even the emotions that are either triggered or triggering the behaviors. So that's kind of a slight change on, it's kind of a melding of a few ideas. You kind of see here how that sort of plays out. So you can intervene at sort of any of these points. And then the overall cycle is also influenced by the person's core beliefs about themselves, about the world, about how other people are, those sort of things. And all of those things are open to challenging. You can change behavior through challenging any of these things. And then the last, most recent sort of phase of therapy is ACT and functional analytic psychotherapy, which is what we're going to be talking about today. Both of these are based on a principle called functional conceptualism, which basically just says that the stories that we tell ourselves about how the world works impacts our behavior, regardless of the truth or untruth of those ideas. So we can learn to act in line with our own values or goals while learning to disregard old stories that don't move us forward. So unlike cognitive behavioral therapy, ACT doesn't try to change thoughts. They don't really believe that's possible. The more you try to fight with thoughts, the more you sort of get stuck with them. So they're more about practicing acceptance. How do you accept thoughts and then still sort of act in a way that's in line with what matters to you? Sort of living aligned with values becomes more important than necessarily feeling happy. Happiness tends to follow living a life of meaning. So it's kind of a different way of conceptualizing therapy. And then dialectical behavioral therapy, the main idea that we take from that's going to be applicable to functional analytic psychotherapy that we're talking about today is the idea of dialectics. So Dr. Linehan sort of coined this, well, she didn't really coin it, but she uses this a lot in her theory. And it basically just means holding two seemingly competing ideas at the same time. So for the sake of functional analytic psychotherapy, when we're melding humanistic ideas with behaviorist ideas, we really have to be able to have this skill of dialectics, holding two things that don't seem to work together at the same time. So an example of this is holding the idea that a person is doing the best they can, while also holding the idea that they need to do better. So you're always balancing between validation and helping the person build the skills to change. Another one is sort of, I can accept you for who you are, and I can help you see the need to change. So one of the ways as we move into functional analytic psychotherapy that we have to be able to do this is holding the idea of, I want to respond to you in the therapy room or in the SILA authentically in the humanistic way. And I want to respond strategically to help you change and shape the behaviors that are going to help you feel more socially connected. And we're going to talk about how that works now as we move into functional analytic psychotherapy. All right, so there's the founders of this therapy. This is a very recent therapy model. Still a lot of research being done on it. It's in its very early sort of stages. So there's the founders, Dr. Mavis Tsai and Dr. Robert Kohlberg. So we spent a lot of time talking about humanistic approaches and behavioristic approaches. And that's because, again, because this therapy blends both of these schools of thought in some interesting ways. So much like Carl Rogers and a humanistic therapeutic approach, this therapy uses the therapeutic relationship to help a person address their concerns. But it does this while staying grounded in the principles of functional analysis, behaviorism. So you're using the ABC model, antecedent behavior consequence. You're using reinforcement to shape behavioral changes over time and helping the person generalize those changes into the world with the goal of building more satisfying relationships. So really, this therapy is focused on using behavioral principles to help the person build the skills to have better social connections. And we'll talk about how that happens. And it's mainly done through the relationship between the therapist and the client, or it can be, again, anybody in this room could use a lot of these principles to help our clients build their social skills. So the idea is basically if the therapist can create an authentic relationship with the client that is of high enough quality, then the behaviors that trouble the client in the world should also show up in the room. So once the person sort of gets comfortable enough with you, the ways that they act with other people will start to show up in how they interact with you. And once they do, if your relationship is strong enough, you'll be able to help them to start shifting, shaping, altering some of those behaviors. You can reinforce when they're trying new things, and we'll talk about how to do that. So when staying grounded in functional analysis, the behaviorist principles, we're looking beyond individual behaviors. So not just focusing just on what is the exact thing that the person just did, but we're trying to look for the function that behavior served. And then once we understand that, we can look for other behaviors and groups of behaviors that maybe serve the same function. And then once we do that, then we can shift, we can hopefully start shifting entire groups of behaviors, right? If we can help them sort of learn new ways of getting needs met by looking for groupings of behaviors. So again, kind of not focusing on an individual star, but looking for the constellations. And once you see the constellations, if you shift a star or two, you might be able to move the whole thing. All right, so now here's where we're going to get to the point of the presentation where a strict behaviorist might recoil a bit. So the core to this therapy are the concepts of awareness, courage, and love. This is kind of at the center of everything else you do within this therapy model. So they do define these concepts in somewhat behavioral terms, and we'll get to that. But these are also very subjective, and as much as you define them behaviorally, we're talking about subjective human experience. But these are sort of foundational principles within how we're going to work here. All right, so awareness. So similarly to when we were talking about the humanistic model, when we were talking about empathy, congruence, and unconditional positive regard as the core factors needed for successful change. It's very similar to the idea here of awareness, courage, and love. So in close relationships, the pattern that tends to be observable is that when one person offers vulnerable disclosure and the other person responds to that vulnerable disclosure with understanding, care, or validation, which in this model would be courage and love. Each time a courageous disclosure is met with love, the likelihood of further disclosure goes up and the relationship becomes deeper. So basically, a person is courageous enough to reveal something vulnerable. You, as the listener, respond to that with love and empathy. They're more likely to do the same in the future, right? That's how relationships get deeper. So when a person is struggling with intimacy in their relationships, using this model in therapy is a way to shape or reinforce patterns that will hopefully help them to deepen their connections outside of the therapy room. So we can actually model and teach them how to do these things by doing it ourselves with them in our therapeutic relationship with them. So awareness specifically here means in the present moment, paying attention to your needs and the needs of the person in the room with you. So present moment awareness means bodily sensations, thoughts, feelings. You're trying to bring accepting, non-judgmental awareness to the experiences that are happening in the room. And then you're also trying to be aware of values. So why am I engaging in this interaction? Who am I? And who do I want to be within this social dynamic? And then others. This is the most challenging part, is we cannot be fully aware of others' experiences. We can practice empathy, perspective taking, notice patterns of behavior, and we can ask, what are you feeling right now? But before we can help, we first have to notice what is happening in the room, in ourself, in the other person, and within the relationship dynamic itself. So can we make sense of the other person's experience from their own point of view rather than our own? Can we notice how they are feeling about themselves, about us, about the relationship? Can we notice what we are feeling about all of those things as well? And can they do that? So these are all the questions we're asking ourselves in the interaction. So courage, in this model, courage is the courage to experience, express, and share in vulnerable experiences with another person. So basically the courage to be real with another human being. So therapy can bring up risks for discomfort. Any social interaction can, and then therapy in particular, right? So both the client and the therapist have the risk of experiencing shame, fear, rejection, fear of appearing weak, fear of looking unknowledgeable. We're all coming into any interaction with those possibilities. Courage is connecting with somebody and staying present, real, and vulnerable in the relationship in spite of the risks. So not the absence of fear or aversion, but action in spite of those fears. So are you willing to stay with the relationship and be vulnerable and accept vulnerability from others? And then the last idea is love. So when someone acts with courage in our presence, how do we respond? And again, courage meaning vulnerability. If we are responding with love, then we're feeling and communicating our acceptance and support to them, to their sort of courageous display of vulnerability, authenticity, realness. We're also using our own awareness to notice when others are acting with love towards us, and we're communicating that as well. So we're trying to be aware of others' acts of courage. We're trying to be aware of others' acts of love. We're trying to respond to acts of courage with love. So, and this is an authentic relationship. When it's an authentic relationship, it's bi-directional. So both parties are doing this back and forth. That's sort of how you know you have a deeper dynamic with somebody. All right, so how do we demonstrate love in this context? So basically, when someone has the courage to ask for what is needed, we want to meet that request lovingly whenever possible. And some of these requests can be requests for closeness, again, more rawness, more realness in the relationship. It might mean respecting boundaries and staying open to feedback. It might mean apologizing, promising, expressing appreciation, and reciprocal disclosure. So a lot of times in therapy, the therapist is sort of a blank wall. In this therapy, they're asking the therapist to also be open and vulnerable and courageous and share some of themselves within the relationship as well. All right, so here is sort of how this model kind of looks. It's kind of a way to diagram it out. So again, when somebody is showing courage, are we accepting that display with love? When somebody's being vulnerable, are we providing that acceptance? And we do that through providing safety, by making sure that they know it's okay to be open, to be vulnerable. When somebody's self-disclosing, are we responding with understanding and empathy? When somebody's asking, are we trying to be giving? And when somebody's asking for connection, are we giving that connection? And then sort of you see at the base of this, both parties need to be able to practice self-care to be in a state to be able to engage in this way. And again, this is bi-directional. Both parties are on both sides of this equation. All right. So again, the focus of this therapy is relationships, relationship patterns, trying to build deeper connections. So what we know is that many relationship patterns are learned. People are generally doing the best they can with the experiences they've had, and they're trying to make their current relationships work. So some strategies and lessons they've learned through the years kind of meet their needs, and some of them don't. Many used to meet their needs and no longer do. But the thing that we do as humans is we will often continue to try to use the same tools sort of over and over. The things that worked before, we'll keep trying to use them if that's all we have, in the absence of reflection and experimentation with new ways of interacting. So people will fall back on old patterns that maybe now are not working, but it's all they got. So within this therapy, we can sort of help them recognize, try new things. And when they try new things, we're going to notice it. We're going to reinforce it. So functional analytic psychotherapy, again, seeks to help people notice how behaviors and the constellations of behaviors are meeting their needs or attempting to meet their needs. And we're going to help them look for new and more effective ways to get those needs met. And the way we do this is through natural reinforcement. So getting back to some of the behaviorist principles. So the therapeutic relationship becomes the space for noticing patterns, trying out new patterns, and then trying to expand and generalize these new patterns into the world. So the therapist reinforces new and more effective strategies in the session by using that awareness, courage, and love model. So again, when the therapist uses their awareness to notice the client's courageous attempt at a new behavior, the therapist reinforces that attempt, that courageous attempt, with authentic expressions of gratitude, which can be awe, love, appreciation, however it's going to be individual. But everything that people do is behavior, right? That's the idea of radical behaviorism. So behaviors happen in the moment and they are steered by consequences. So the way we respond to interactions can therefore alter how that person behaves in the future. So if they try something courageous and we respond with love, they're more likely to try that again in the future. Or even the idea of trying something new itself gets reinforced. Whereas if we respond to a new attempt, an act of courage with indifference or even like a negative reaction, they're less likely to be so brave again in the future. So in functional analytic psychotherapy, we stay aware of how our behavior in session impacts our clients' future behavior in and out of session. So we're being both present and real, but we're also trying to be strategic. Again, it's trying to hold two ideas at the same time. All right, the concept of generalization. So much like in ABA therapy, behaviorist therapy, behavioral change is only useful if it generalizes across people, across places, across circumstances. It's great if somebody learns to do a new behavior with one specific person, but if they don't take that into the world, then maybe it's not as useful as it could be. So in functional analytic psychotherapy, we encourage the person to try out new ways of being in the world, in their relationships outside of the therapy room. So an example of how you might do this, you might respond in therapy or with your client, something like, I truly appreciated you telling me exactly what you needed from me today. I wonder if your case manager or your parents might appreciate that too. You're trying to help them notice that they did something that was effective, and you're reinforcing it through your own appreciation, your own love, your recognition of their courageous attempt to try something different. So how can we apply this? The idea is, how can we apply this new brave thing that just happened between us? How can we apply that outside in the world? All right, so up to this point, we've seen a lot of the influence of the more humanistic, relationship-centered therapeutic concerns mixed in with some behaviorism. But this therapy differs from strictly humanistic therapy in that it tries to stay grounded in the principles of functional analysis. So within this approach, we ask, what is the behavior? In what context does the behavior occur? What is the function of the behavior? What is it likely doing for the person? And how does that behavior show itself when they interact with me specifically? So we're looking for the function of a behavior and within a constellation of behaviors that are trying to meet the same need. And then we're trying to help the person find new ways of meeting those needs that are more in line with their own values or their ability to connect with others and have real relationships. And then once we do that, we assess again, we reinforce the gains that have been made, or we help them try something new. And then we systematically track these changes over time. So a big difference is this process should be done with the person, right? We're not doing this to them, we're doing this with them. So they should be aware of everything that's happening, even the ideas of reinforcing new behaviors. Like none of this should be sort of outside of their awareness, to the ability that they're able to understand that. All right, so Again, something else that differs in the functional analytics psychotherapy approach versus a strictly behavioral approach is that we should never let go of the belief that the person can make meaning of their own experiences as well. So we always want to try to remember that it's not our job to just shape people into something more closely resembling our idea of what a typical person should be. But our goal is instead to connect with their humanity, to recognize their own desire for growth and meaning, and to adapt our interventions to help get them closer to their own best versions of themselves, individually and socially. So it's kind of the idea of what good is an intervention that simply teaches a person to present to the world that they are happy, right, and social. But if we're actually ignoring the subjective experiences and their interpretations of their life and social connections, are we just teaching somebody to behave in a way that appears typical while ignoring their actual contentment, their actual satisfaction with their own life? So we want to make sure we're never stepping so fully out of humanism that we're losing that. So within functional analysis, we want to, again, orient the problems or the behaviors involved in the presenting problem. So we're looking for specific behaviors. What is causing, how does this person define problems in their life? And what are the behaviors that are visible that we can see that might be causing these areas of their life to fall short of their satisfaction? We want to help them assess the function of those behaviors, notice the classes, functional classes, again, the constellation versus the stars, and we're going to help them define improvements. So some of the ways we do this when we're determining the function, we might ask, what was happening when you felt that way? What were you doing when this thing happened? What were you thinking when you behaved that way? What were you feeling? Where were you when that happened? What happened before that? What factors do you think contributed to that? When you felt that way, what did you do? What happened next? What did you do next? How did you feel then? Etc. So you notice we don't ask why. The person is likely trying to figure out the why as well as you are, right? They're unlikely to have that answer ready. So you may just get their best guess, which could be rooted in their own negative perception of themselves or others, or just patterns that have developed over time. We all sort of have stories that we tell ourselves to explain some of our behaviors that may not be the actual reason why we do those behaviors. So they might say something like, I don't know why, I guess I'm just being mean, or because she hates me. But those may or may not be the actual reasons. So we want to help them be sort of their own investigators, looking for the ABCs. So our job is to help illuminate patterns so that we can eventually help them to try something new that may break up the unsatisfying behavioral traps that they've fallen into over time. So when we're looking at function, there's a couple functional types. So determining which category a behavior falls into will help narrow down the function. So there's so some behaviors move us towards something that we want, right? We get positivity reinforced when we do something. And some behaviors function to move us away from something that is aversive, right? So we avoid things that are uncomfortable, things that we don't enjoy. So one of the ways we look at this is if that client is hospital seeking, let's say we have a client that's hospital seeking, are they trying to get to the hospital for type 1 because the food is great and the nurses are nice and they're trying to get to the hospital because it's a more positive experience than their group home? Or are they trying to go to the hospital because their roommate steals their stuff and they just want to be anywhere other than their room? So kind of once we know that, are they moving towards something positive? Are they moving away from something negative? If we know that, then the new behaviors we try and the environmental changes we make will be different. So the functional consequence may seem counterintuitive to us. So one of the reasons why we're tracking all these things is a lot of these things don't necessarily adhere to what we think of as common sense or like simple idea of cause and effect. We're looking for patterns that may not be noticeable unless we're really paying attention. But one thing to keep in mind is that for every behavior, there is some payoff. They're getting something out of it. It's just up to us to try to figure out what that is. And it could be really complicated. So let's give an example. A person says yes to every project that's offered to them at work. They are burnt out, they have no time with family, and other things they value in life are falling by the wayside. In this case, the payoff of looking professionally capable and motivated may be more reinforcing for them than the fear of burnout is aversive for them. Let's say someone puts off sending out resumes for a job, even though they desperately need the money. So the aversive thing that they're avoiding may be rejection, right? They might be avoiding rejection. That might be the thing that they're moving away from. And that might be more powerful to them than the payoff of potentially getting money for work, right? So we're looking for the reasons people are doing things. So again, we want to look beyond a single behavior to try to define entire classes of behaviors, because once we do that, you can shift much broader areas of people's lives. So each person has, again, unique personality traits that are going to determine what is reinforcing and what is aversive to them. One person might be extra sensitive to criticism and therefore take actions that avoid putting themselves in positions to be embarrassed in spite of the seeming cost of the avoidance. And once you know that about the person, you can look for where this plays out in their life. Does this person turn down opportunities at work because they'll be more visible and open to being embarrassed? Does this person become inhibited in social settings and they turn down opportunities to spend quality time with friends? Avoiding the feared outcome of being criticized may be driving behaviors throughout their life. And all the behaviors that meet this function of avoidance or criticism becomes a functional class of behaviors. Once we have a functional class of behaviors meeting the same need, then we can intervene in a way that may change a broad array of behaviors rather than just one specific behavior. Okay, so how do we do this in functional analytic psychotherapy? So the way we track this in this type of therapy is through what we call clinically relevant behaviors. This is a key concept that plays throughout all of this therapy. So once we've helped the client find the function and functional class of behaviors, then we can do our intervention and track progress over time. So how we track behavioral change over time is through our awareness of their clinically relevant behaviors. So what is that? Clinically relevant behaviors are social interactions in the therapy room that are potentially connected to behaviors outside of the room. So we're looking for this thing that happens between the client and us that might be the same thing that's causing them problems in the world and their other relationships. So we want to look for what needs that behavior is trying to meet for the person and help the person systematically shape that behavior into something that meets the same need, but may be more aligned with their own values or what is socially acceptable within their own framework of understanding of that. So we'll talk more about how to do this, how to notice these CRBs. But basically, it's patterns in life playing out in the here and now relationship. All right, so CRB1, clinically relevant behavior 1. So a clinically relevant behavior is a behavior that is trying to meet a need, but is showing the same issues that brought the client into therapy to begin with. So the way they're interacting with you may be problematic in the same way that they have problems interacting with other people out in the world. All right, so let's give an example. Maybe the person struggles with expressing their sadness in the world. Instead, they tend to show anger and lash out. So when you're looking, once you're looking for the function and you theorize that they are seemingly avoiding being vulnerable, if this also happens in therapy, then you would know that that's a CRB1, right? And basically in this therapy, we're trying to move from CRB1s to CRB2s, and we'll explain more about what that is and how we do that. But basically a CRB1 is a behavior that served a function for the client at one time, but is now contributing to lack of authentic connection in their social relationships. And you're seeing it happen with you. All right, so some common classes of CRB1s. So people might not be good at asserting their own needs. They might have difficulty expressing their needs. They might be too subtle. They might be too indirect, or they might be too demanding. They might be too determined to appear independent. They might be pushing others away, or they might be very needy. You can see where some different problems can sort of latch onto that idea of assertion of needs. 2, bidirectional communication. Maybe they have a hard time receiving or giving feedback. Maybe they're overly positive or they're overly negative. Maybe they have unreasonable expectations of themselves or others or the therapist. Maybe they're lacking awareness of their impact on the therapist. Maybe they dominate the conversation. Maybe they're overly passive in the conversation. 3, conflict. So maybe the person struggles with tolerating disagreement. They might avoid negative or challenging conversations. They might have ineffective conflict resolution skills. They might come across as blaming the therapist for their problems, or unwilling to forgive themselves or the therapist after a rupture in the relationship. 4 is disclosure, interpersonal closeness. So they might have a problem with that. So this could play out through you witnessing difficulty expressing or receiving closeness or caring, talking about themselves too much, or not disclosing vulnerable details enough. Maybe not listening in the conversation with the therapist, not being trusting, or maybe they're too trusting. We all know the clients that just tell everything to everybody with no filter. So 5, emotional experience and expression. So you're going to look for things like difficulty identifying emotions, being unaware of their emotions in the moment, hiding emotions, flat affect, avoiding displays of emotions like crying or laughing, engaging in negative self-talk while experiencing emotions, or expressing emotions in overly intense manner, expressing emotions in a way that alienates the therapist. And then you can guess that this is probably how they're acting in the world too. So again, you're looking for CRB1s because you want to help them notice that if this is happening with you, it's probably happening outside in their other relationships. All right, so once we sort of know our CRB1s, and our goal is to move towards CRB2s. So a CRB2 is any improvement from the CRB1 behavior. So any incremental improvement. So a CRB2 is a behavior that shows up in therapy that is an improvement upon their original CRB1 behavior. So the thing that you identified is like, here's where somebody's struggling in their relationships. They have the courage to try something new, and it's a little bit more effective. That becomes a CRB2. So here's an example. So maybe that client lashed out with anger rather than expressing their sadness, now says, "I'm sad," but loudly in an angry tone. So is it the ideal expression? Not yet. We're going to be doing shaping, but this authentic expression of what they're feeling is an improvement upon the CRB1 of just lashing out and not communicating what they're feeling. And then as we notice these CRB2 improvements, we reinforce them. And we do that through praise, encouragement, drawing attention to the positive outcomes, whatever works for that individual. We're noticing the attempt at something new, something works just a little bit better. We want to make sure we're laying on the praise for it. And again, we want to remember that these CRB2s are very unlikely to be the final product, right? The applied behavioral analysis principle of shaping will be used as the clinician continues to help the person move their goals, and we'll talk about how that works. All right, so quick quiz for kind of a trivia. So a staff is meeting with her client. During the meeting, the staff asks the client to help her with the task. The client screams no at the staff and leaves the room. So is this a CRB1 or a CRB2 behavior? Do you have any guesses? We got a CRB1, CRB1, CRB1. We've got a smarty pants in here too. All right, so basically it's a trick question because it depends. The answer depends on a number of factors. So what brought the person in for therapy in the first place? So CRB1s and CRB2s should be conceptualized with the person, and something that could be a problematic behavior but not related to the goals you have currently so what need was the person trying to meet, and was there an improvement? Basically what we're looking for is just, was there an improvement from where they were when they came in? So is this an improvement in a previous behavior that met the same need that they were trying to meet? So not a perfect new behavior, but a new behavior that is closer to the person's goal, what they said they wanted to work on. So I'll kind of give an example to try to make this make more sense. So let's say in that example that we gave, the pop quiz example, that the client came to therapy because they felt like they're too passive. They feel like they never state their own needs, they never set boundaries or assert themselves. And this leads them to a life where they don't feel like they respect themselves and they don't feel respected by others. So in that case, when the client took their stand, and even though it wasn't the most effective way, saying no and storming out of the room, not the most effective way to meet that need. But if we're conceptualizing it as this person's trying to become more assertive, and in the past, they've always just complied with anything that they're told, then this is actually a movement in a positive direction. It becomes a CRB2. They've tried something new and something more effective than total passivity. So this doesn't mean that we stop there, that we would, this would lead to many other problems for the client, right? If we just left them with this new behavior of shouting and leaving the room. So we want to help them sort of take this new behavior of standing up for themselves, of advocating for themselves. And we want to use the idea of shaping to help them sort of continue to progress this new behavior to something that is going to work for them in the long run. And that's going to meet the same need of not being a doormat, right? But also isn't going to alienate people that are trying to help. So the way we can look at this is the client came in with their CRB1 of they tend to be too passive, they agree to everything, they never say no, they never set boundaries. You know, that leaves somebody really vulnerable to basically just being directed around by anybody, right? The CRB2 in this case is the client took a stand against a request by the staff by shouting no and leaving the room. Again, is this the ideal behavior? Is this where we want to leave them? No. But it is an improvement on becoming a little more assertive in their life. So what do we do now? We've got this new behavior of the person shouting and leaving the room. Well, that becomes the new CRB1. So we're not done working. We just move, the new behavior is now the new CRB1. And we're asking ourselves, how can that become even more effective for the person in a way that meets their need, but doesn't alienate people? So the new CRB1 now is the client shouts no and leaves the room when they don't agree to something. The new CRB2 is, you'll notice when the client says no, maybe with a slightly elevated tone, but stays in the room. So now you really want to reinforce that. That's a more effective way of meeting the same need of taking a stand and being assertive without all of the problems, right? So you're basically, as you're moving through therapy, you're just shifting. Each new CRB2 becomes the new CRB1 as you continue to shape behaviors. All right, so when you're operating within the functional analytic psychotherapy framework, you want to try to stay within these 5 rules. So you want to always be operating from the core ideas of awareness, courage, and love. And you want to be using these 5 rules as you're doing so. So you want, rule 1 is you're going to watch for CRBs. Rule 2 is you're going to evoke CRBs, and we'll talk about how to do that. 3, you're going to naturally reinforce CRB2s. 4, you're going to notice your impact. And 5, you're going to provide functional interpretations of behavior and implement generalization strategies. So we'll go through each of these and kind of talk about what each of these are. So 1, watching for CRBs. So we're using the principle of awareness, right, to notice CRBs. So you're going to notice when a client is engaging in a CRB1 or a CRB2. Are they exhibiting the same social strategy to get their needs met that they identified as problematic? Or are they demonstrating the courage to try something new and maybe more effective? So again, maybe a client came to therapy because they tend to be very blunt in their communication, and this has hurt relationships. And in the session, you notice that the client seems to take your feelings into consideration as they still assert their need. So you want to notice that when that happens, right? You want to notice the new effort, the new behavior, and have the courage to acknowledge it and shape it by reinforcing it with love. So in order to continue helping the person change, we have to stay aware so that we know when to reinforce. All right, so next one is evoking CRBs. So sometimes these CRBs will happen naturally in session, right? They're just going to come up in the course of your interaction with each other. Other times we're going to need to create the conditions where the person can try out new ways of meeting their needs. So evoking isn't provoking, right? So I know sometimes people worry about that, like, are we going to cause behavioral issues here? That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to create the conditions where a person can practice new ways of interacting that might more effectively meet their needs. So some of the ways we might do this. So if a client struggles with being assertive, you might invite the client to start by giving you a statement of their needs. You're helping them practice telling you what they need today. If a client fears intimacy, you might ask the client personal questions, encourage them to be courageous in revealing a little something about themselves. If a client has difficulty accepting love, you might ask them to notice your warm expression to them. Ask them to notice when you're being kind and warm and you're glad to see them. If the client has asked for help being more responsive to the emotional needs of others, you might spend a few moments sharing a personal story of loss, of your own loss, while providing the opportunity for them to respond. So you're giving them the chance to practice their own expressions of love and kindness and empathy. But that requires you to also be courageous enough to reveal a little something about yourself. All right. The next one is naturally reinforcing CRB2s. So again, sometimes we have to evoke, sometimes we're going to just notice CRB2s happening naturally within the interaction. And when we notice it, we need to reinforce the CRB2s. So new attempts at different ways of meeting needs. And when we notice them doing it, we reinforce it. So the way we do that is we respond in a way that's socially natural, but intense. So you don't want to be so over the top that you come across as inauthentic, and nobody likes that. But you also want to take your response up just a little bit, just so it's noticeable. So you want to emphasize safety and acceptance. So even if somebody is making mistakes, we want to make sure we are always making it a space where they can try new things and sometimes not be successful. You speak with conviction when you're letting them know that something was progress. Learn what works for each given person. Again, not everybody wants a high five. Not everybody wants a good job. We have to kind of figure out what each person's needs are, and then be authentic. People know when we're not authentic. All right, the next rule is noticing your impact. So you need to be able to notice the impact of the work that you're doing with the person. So, this can occur naturally, again, in the therapy dynamic and through behavioral tracking. So again, this process is rooted in behaviorism, but it's also about using behaviorism to help deepen social connections. So again, we have to kind of keep a foot in both worlds. So in the room with the person, we discuss the subjective experience of the relationship from their perspective, as well as from your own perspective, and about progress through therapy. So you're going to discuss the progress they're making in therapy with you. You're also going to discuss the progress they're making in their outside relationships as a result of your work together. So you just want to make sure all along the way, you're noticing improvements, you're pointing out improvements, you're reinforcing those improvements. And then the last step is you're going to help the client notice patterns in their behavior in order to connect the dots, kind of, and again, in the constellation of behaviors that are attempting to meet similar needs. So we're going to provide functional interpretations of behavior and support generalizations. And we're going to do this again with the client. We're not taking on that expert role that we know better than they do about the whys of why they're doing things. We are helping explore it with them and doing it through data tracking as well. So the functional analysis and case formulation is done with the client. You want to help the client become aware of the parallels between their CRBs in the room with you and how they interact with others in the world. You want to collaborate with the client in the functional analysis process. You want to help the client schedule activities that provide opportunities to practice their CRB2s in the world. So you want to make sure that they have those opportunities to generalize, and discuss with the client how they are applying what they're learning. So each time you're meeting with them, you're sort of checking in, like, did you try being assertive with your case manager like you told me you would? That sort of thing. All right, so now we're going to talk about some of the techniques within functional analytic psychotherapy. All right, so we must always keep in mind that the people we serve are very accustomed to having people in their life that tell them that the way they are isn't right or isn't appropriate, right? Like our clients hear that all the time. So functional analytic psychotherapy isn't completely humanistic in that it's like completely accepting all the time. But we do want to move at a pace that allows us to take the time to listen, to validate, to empathize, and to respect our individuals' autonomy, right? We're not, again, doing this therapy to them, we're doing it with them. And we want to make sure we're going at a pace that's recognizing humanity as well. Again, our individuals are so used to handing their will, their sort of self-direction over to others, right? So if we become too directive, their authentic inner selves can fade into the background, and we'll miss the chance for them to gain meaning in their new ways of being rather than just changing behaviors. Again, we're not just concerned with changing the behaviors. We want to make sure we're helping them actually become happier, to build more satisfaction in their relationships in their lives, not just observable change that doesn't impact how they actually experience their lives. And we also want to be aware that we risk rupturing the relationship if our individuals see that we're just another voice pushing them to be more like we are, rather than the best version of themselves, right? So just always keeping in mind that being different is great. Being different is amazing. It's what makes the world turn. We're not trying to shape our individuals against their will into some version of themselves that's more aligned with our personal idea of what social norms are. We want to keep in mind that for many of our individuals, their relationships and social connection have often been places where they felt the most rejected, the most misunderstood, and the most unsafe. So if we're operating from a place of love, of unconditional positive regard, kind of however we want to define it, then we have a chance to show them another way of connecting, helping them feel understood, accepted, and just knowing that they're kind of enough. So whatever changes they ultimately choose for themselves will hopefully come from a deeper, more meaningful place. And if that's the case, they're going to feel much better about it than if we're just shaping behaviors sort of against their will. All right. So some of the tactics we use, the techniques we use, there's more self-disclosure in this type of therapy than there's by the therapist than there is in a lot of other therapies. We're modeling courage for them, not just expecting it. So we're being a little more self-disclosing, sharing a little bit more of ourselves. Again, with some recognition of boundaries, like you want to make sure you're not oversharing, but you want to just be a little bit more real than that normal sort of staff-client relationship where they know nothing about us other than our role as authority figure. It's collaborative. You're doing it with them. It's accepting and validating. Again, even as we're working with them to help them change, we're accepting them for who they are. They're doing the best they can, and we can help change. And directness and courage is sort of vital to the process. All right, so within this therapy, we must always be assessing ourselves as well, right? They've got their CRB1s and CRB2s. The clinician has T1s and T2s. So the idea of like awareness, courage, and love, again, is for both the client and the therapist. Authentic relationships are bi-directional. They go both ways, right? We're trying to teach them to be in real relationships, not just compliant. So as we're trying to help the client move from CRB1s to CRB2s, we're also trying to notice and shape our own behavior from T1s to T2s, shaping and improving our therapeutic approach in the relationship. All right, so we're doing this by maintaining our own awareness of when we're not acting courageously, when we're not acting in the best interest of the client, when maybe we're withholding a loving response, or maybe when our awareness is lacking, we get distracted. So we don't need to maintain a perfect air of professional perfection. We're modeling how to incrementally move towards improvement. the same way we're trying to help them do that. So that requires sort of our own sort of courage to be self-reflective and open to observation by ourselves and also by the person we're in the room with. So some ways, some things that can be T1 behaviors for the therapist, things that can be improved upon, common ones. So being too controlling or too directive. We're guiding too much of the session. We're not giving enough room for the client. It's not a bi-directional relationship. Maybe we're avoiding expressions of emotion. We're coming across too protected, too flat. We're expecting them to be courageous in their openness, but we're not doing the same. Maybe we avoid evoking emotional reactions in the person that may be uncomfortable for the clinician, right? There's a difference between avoiding evoking reaction because it's harmful to the person versus avoiding evoking a reaction because it's hard for us to sit with, right? Seeing somebody else struggle with an emotion might be hard for us to sit with, but sometimes that's also the thing that needs to be worked on. So are we being courageous while acting within the best interest of the person? Maybe we're not directing the interaction enough and the interaction becomes unproductive. Maybe we're not defining the case conceptualization effectively. And then each improvement, again, upon those T1 behaviors is a T2 behavior. So again, just like we don't stop at CRB2s from CRB1s, we don't rest in satisfaction at our T2s. We acknowledge our improvement, hopefully with some self-love, and we look to shape our behavior more towards who we want to be in our therapeutic relationship. So again, our T2 becomes our new T1 as we keep improving. So some T2 behaviors. So instead of being too directive, maybe now you're more collaborative. Maybe instead of avoiding emotion, you're now allowing or inviting expressions of emotion. Instead of avoiding uncomfortable experiences that might be evoked, you're validating, accepting, attending to the present moment experience, sitting with it, etc. All right, so here's an example of a case conceptualization form. So conceptualization of the case is a process, again, that should be done with the client, with the person. So you want to look at relevant history, the problems that brought the person into therapy, and their own goals. And what does improvement look for them in their life? What does improvement look like for them in their life outside of therapy? And then we look for CRB behaviors that happen in the room that are in the constellation of the problem behaviors that are serving the same function in the same problematic way in the world. So again, so we're looking for, they say, I have problems with anger in my relationships, right? How are we going to define that? How's that going to show up in the room with us? How is that going to be a CRB1 when it shows up in the room? We then identify what improvements might look like in session, or CRB2s, that bring them closer to the way they want to be outside of the room. Right, so let's kind of look at sort of how we might do this. So determining what to work on in therapy. So some of the questions you might ask yourself and ask the person, what does the person most need to do in their life right now? What does the person need to learn to accept and experience? What does the person need to think about, feel, or attend to? What actions does this person need to take in their life? What does this person do that makes therapy less effective at addressing those needs? What is the function of that behavior and why does it make sense from the person's perspective? What are the most important things for you to do with the person? And what must you be willing to accept yourself in order to do that work with the person? Right. And then we bring, again, functional analysis into the process. So you want to determine the key behaviors and look for the context of problems. You want to look for the function of those behaviors, right? ABC model. Look for classes of behaviors. So varied behaviors that may be meeting the same functions. Again, constellation versus stars. Define improvements in the world and in the therapy room. So how do we know when we're moving from CRB1 to CRB2? And then also understanding how the therapist's behaviors may interfere or support the person's progress, our T1s, our T2s. How is what we're doing either helping or impeding the progress of the person? And then we're going to shape the client's behavior and our own behavior over time. All right, so the process, again, all of this should be done always with keeping in mind the sort of core ideas of awareness, courage, and love, or the sort of humanistic way of looking at it is empathy, congruence, unconditional positive regard. Throughout the whole process, those factors should be present. And then as we're defining the problem, we want to arrive at an initial formulation with the person. And then we're going to test that formulation. We're going to refine and test again. Right? This is basically behaviorism in a nutshell. Right? You're theorizing why behaviors are happening. You're helping them try new things. And then you're assessing success, trying new things. Right? And that process is a scientific method, and you're just going to keep going over and over as you're sort of shaping improvements. All right, so step one, arrive at initial formulation with the person. So you're going to identify the problem behavior. Again, hopefully the client is coming to you with what they see as the problem, the thing they want to improve upon. And then you're going to help theorize about the function with them. You're going to define functional classes of behaviors, looking for constellations, identify CRB1 and CRB2s within those functional classes. Right. Then step two, we're going to test the formulation. Right. So formulate CRB2s that can be evoked in the therapy relationship and reinforced by the therapist with the client. And then we're going to notice, is the person able to change their CRB1s to CRB2s? And does that create the desired effects in the world? So if they're shifting their behaviors in the room, but it's not actually improving their life outside the room, maybe we need to revisit our formulation. So looking at an example, the person feels like they're not assertive enough. The therapist evokes an opportunity to work on this by encouraging the person to ask for what they need assertively in therapy. The person then tries being more direct with their case manager outside of therapy and gets their needs met in the real world. So the movement from CRB1 to CRB2 appears to have the desired effect in this case. All right, and step three, we're going to refine the formulation and test again. So if the attempted intervention does not achieve the desired result, maybe the CRB1 isn't the most correct, or the function may be something other than what we initially theorized. So we're going to keep theorizing, testing, re-theorizing. The ultimate question should always be, is the person having greater satisfaction in their relationships in the real world as a result of our work? That's sort of the metric of success. All right, so here is kind of a case example so we can kind of see this play out from start to finish. All right, so here's the case. Our client, Gary, has asked to meet with you, his counselor, at the day program. Gary states that his peers have been mean to him and he's feeling rejected and left out. Gary says that he used to sit with them at lunch every day, but now they don't invite him to sit with them anymore. He tells you that last week he told one of his peers, Susie, that she was a jerk for not letting him take a drink from her soda. He tells you how rude that was of her. Gary notices a coffee on your desks and asks for a sip. After you politely decline, he says that you are the worst counselor for not letting him take that sip. He says that even though you are a jerk, he still wants to meet regularly so that he can talk about how lonely he is. All right, so as we sort of conceptualize this case, we want to determine what need is Gary trying to meet. So there's a couple of needs. One, social connection. Two, snacks and beverages. But we know he hasn't come to therapy because he doesn't get enough snacks. He's come because he notices his lack of social connection and his desire for friends. However, the reinforcer of an occasional soda or coffee is really powerful for him and sometimes overrides his actual desire, which is to have friends. So we want to help him figure out how to get his needs met in a way that meets both needs. So maybe can he talk to his case manager about having regular soda access or access to coffee and sodas with his money. But the main thing we're going to focus on is how can he improve his relationships. All right, so looking at this case conceptualization form, relevant history. Gary is reported feeling isolated from his social group and describes feeling lonely. His daily life problems. Gary tends to insult his friends, and when they don't give him a requested snack or drink. In vivo, which basically just means in room, like when he's with you, how is he acting? So with you, this is the CRB1, Gary uses insulting language when his request is not met in a way that he finds satisfactory. So improvement in the room with you, in vivo would be Gary will express disappointment when a request isn't met rather than engaging in personal insults. And the daily life goals, Gary will improve his ability to accept when others don't meet his request in order to have stronger social connections. So we're theorizing that the thing that's causing his relationships to struggle is that he's kind of unpleasant to be around when he wants something from somebody, right? So we're going to try to help him work on that. All right, so while addressing the person-specific CRBs, there are also CRBs sort of related to the awareness, courage, and love model. So these sort of general ones that you can often look for. So within functional analytic psychotherapy, it theorizes that the deepest relationships, the relationships in our life that would bring us the most meaning, the most satisfaction, are the ones that have these elements: awareness, courage, and love. So we can use our own awareness to notice when our clients might be struggling to make these deeper connections. And we can encourage and reinforce new ways of acting with awareness and courage and love to help them make these connections with us and then hopefully in the world. So some places where people might have deficits in this model is, as far as awareness deficits, they might not notice details in conversations. They might not notice their impact on others, like the impact of their behavior upon others. So again, Gary not noticing that when he takes people's sodas, that's the reason they don't want to be around him, right? Maybe they don't have the awareness to describe their own emotions. They can't tell you even what they're feeling. Maybe they're overly focused on protocol or professionalism. Maybe the therapist is. Courage. So maybe they're withholding a vulnerability, vulnerable details about their life, things that may not make them look great or strong. Maybe they're suppressing or avoiding emotion. Maybe they're presenting overly positive details or being overly assertive or overly guarded. And then some CRBs related to love. Maybe they don't provide feedback. They don't let people know how they're feeling about them. Maybe they're uncomfortable with warmth or validation, or with providing feedback in an authentic way. All right, so whether addressing the person-specific or awareness, courage, and love CRBs, the opportunities are going to come up in one of two ways. So we talked about they're either going to be pure, so natural interactions that come up in the therapy relationship, or they're going to be contextual. So the therapist evokes CRP responses with intention. The therapist creates an opportunity to notice patterns and to practice new patterns. And the therapist may also note real world opportunities coming up to work on CRBs. So an example might be if a person struggles with accepting change, the therapist knows that the day program schedule is going to be changing soon. This is an opportunity to practice acceptance CRBs. So the next thing we need to be doing is linking the CRBs to the real world issues that brought the person into therapy, right? So we're trying to help the person notice, again, the constellation of behaviors rather than the individual behavior. And we're trying to help them recognize, how does this thing that's happening in the room between you and I play out when you're in the world with your friends, with your family, with people at work. So again, we're presenting theories with the clients, we're theorizing, we're testing. We're not the expert coming to cure them. So in therapy, it's always helpful to sort of stay in a wondering mindset. So kind of always saying, like, I wonder if you don't say what you think to your friend in the same way you don't say what you think to your parent, that you worry that they may reject your request and you'll feel hurt. So you're making the connections, helping them explore connections and seeing if they resonate with them. So another one might be, I wonder if you would be willing to practice saying to me something that you were holding back. So there's a chance to evoke. And again, don't push your theory if it doesn't resonate with the person. Like, again, they know themselves better than you. But if the pattern persists, there'll be opportunities to try out the theory again. You can always revisit it. And we're often planting seeds for thought, right? You may bring something up today that they're going to feel defensive about and not accept, but a week from now, maybe it lands. And frankly, sometimes we can be wrong, right? We are just theorizing. All right, so again, evoking. So when we don't have the opportunity when something's not coming up naturally, we want to create the opportunities to practice new ways of interacting. So it's important to remember, evoking is not provoking. So the process is collaborative. We want to make sure the client's not surprised by an opportunity to evoke a CRB. We're talking about this all through therapy with them, right? That this is something we're going to do. So we're evoking with love at the foundation of it. It should always be about helping them identify what they're doing, why they might be doing it, and what else they might try, and why that might work better. So if evoking a particular response is likely to create an unsafe or traumatic situation for the client, we don't do it. So we want to encourage our clients' own courage to face new things, but always at their pace. So again, we're not trying to create unsafe situations that might re-traumatize them, etc. So we're talking about, like, hey, there's going to be opportunities to practice these new ways, and then we do it with them. Some of the ways we do this: you can describe what you notice, you can prompt the client to notice, you can request an invite, you can make bold requests and express empathy and love, and we'll talk a little bit about how to do some of those things. So if the client holds back authentic feelings, right, they're withholding of their authenticity, you might ask, like, what do you feel about me right now? And that requires courage on your part too, right? Because you don't necessarily know what they're going to say. The second one, if you might want to draw attention to a possible CRB that maybe they're not aware of, you might say, I'm noticing a pattern, ... If you're having an authentic emotional response and it would benefit the person to know about it, then you can communicate that. And so through your own example of courage, sort of show your love and appreciation. For the sake of time, I'm going to kind of keep moving. All right, so some other concrete ways to evoke: you can invite the person to be more intentional or focused in their sharing during session. You can share your own appreciations or invite them to share appreciations. And you're modeling showing love and concern in a relationship. You might assign a questionnaire asking for authentic feedback on a previous session. Some therapists will do appreciation grumps and gripes at the end of each session, where you allow the person to say what they liked, what they didn't like. You can assign an emotional risk log, have them complete a loss inventory, identify 100 positives exercise, complete a personal mission statement, write an anger gratitude letter. You're trying to evoke deeper sort of reaction. All right. And then homework is a big part of this, because again, you don't want to just end at CRB2s. You want to help them move those CRB2s into the world. All right. So some of the ways you can do this is assign them homework of trying these new things out in the world. You're going to try to help them look for opportunities, like where, hey, you just did this awesome thing with me. Where do you think you can try this out? And then have them keep a log of their attempts and how it goes. All right, so now we come to the part, but I'm not a therapist, right? A lot of this sounds like specifically what a therapist is doing with a client in a therapy session. But a lot of these principles can really be applied at almost any level, right? Like we're talking about the way we interact in a relationship with others that's less cold and professional and more authentic, right? So a lot of these principles can be applied. Not all of them, obviously, like we have to maintain some clinical distance sometimes as a staff, but where possible, we're aiming for modeling what authentic, healthy relationships look like. All right, so again, you don't have to be a therapist or doing by the book functional analytic psychotherapy to use some or most of the principles we talked about today. Your individual relationship can make all the difference to someone living in a SCILA or participating in a day program. All right, so many of our individuals, they long for authentic social connection, but they just can't seem to figure out the formula, right, to get there. And when they try, they're often met with hurt and rejection. So part of a shift in mindset when you're doing this therapy is that we don't need to agree with every strategy that someone uses to try to get their needs met. Right? Sometimes behavior can be scary, can hurt someone, or it can just feel really insulting when somebody's behaving in ways to us, to other people. So the magic that we can bring as staff, as people working with our clients, is that we can support people in changing their behavior while also seeing the longing and the pain underneath that behavior, right? These behaviors come from somewhere. And if we can take a step back and look for the deeper hurts, the deeper longings, then we can have more real connections with them as well. And we can communicate that unconditional love and support, while also, again, holding two ideas at the same time: unconditional support, love, understanding why people act the way they do, and while also holding the other idea that we can hopefully help them change, help them find other ways of meeting their needs. We don't want to change who they are at the core of who they are. We want to help them figure out new ways of being the person they want to be, of having the life they want to have, of having the satisfaction in the relationships they want to have. So I know, like, none of this is easy work for any of us. I know many of us go home at the end of the day feeling physically, emotionally wrung out. But at the end of the day, we are often the only social connection for the individuals that we serve. We're not just the model, the teacher. We are also the actual only social connection a lot of times for our clients. Some of them are lucky and are home every weekend with family and have deep, rich lives. And I know that's our goal for all of our clients. But when we really think about many of them, right, they're limited to their group home, they're limited to their day program. And who are the most fundamental people in their lives but those 2 or 3 staff that are there every day? Those are the primary social connections they have. So in a fundamental and really real way, how we interact with them will determine their quality of life. Right. And how we talked about how social connection impacts physiology and health and general, again, happiness, satisfaction with life. Ultimately, that often comes down to how we interact with them. So if we had to break this theory down to its sort of most basic and applicable level, it would be courageous enough to expose yourself emotionally to another and to receive the vulnerability of others with love. When you notice somebody else being courageous, responding to that with love and acceptance, and basically be real, but do so with kindness. And again, the last key point again is we are the social connection for our clients. So we have to make these relationships count. And yeah, thank you all.
Thank you so much, Matt. And I really appreciate that last slide. Your emphasis on the importance of how our interactions, can help foster that social interaction with or social connection with the clients that we serve. Absolutely wonderful. If anyone has, I haven't seen any questions come through, but if anyone has any quick questions that they want to type in the chat box right now, or the Q&A, Matt, I was just going to ask you if you had any tips for if we have clients who may not recognize that parallel behavior between, like the office and the real world, and how you would work with that client to make that acknowledgement.
Yeah. I mean, again, like a lot of this theory isn't necessarily taking into account the wide range of functionality that we work with on a day-to-day basis, right? So our job is always far more complicated by the fact that we have to make sure that we're meeting our clients where they're at. We're figuring out how do we change our own ways of communicating things that are going to make sense to them and the ways that they best understand. And with something like that specifically, as I'm thinking about it, I'm like, well, maybe you can as much as possible, be the person that's helping them seek out these opportunities to try the new things, right? Maybe you're the one that actually walks them to the case manager's office and sort of guides them to take that next step. Maybe you bring somebody else that's really important in their life to help them out with that. It's going to be, again, very individualized to where the person's at, but I think most of us in this room, one thing we do have is an understanding of the need to be flexible and try to meet our clients where they're at, and I'd say sticking with that idea.
Absolutely. I am not seeing any questions come through. If anyone has any questions moving forward, you're more than welcome to email me. I can get the information from Matt, but again, thank you so much, Matt, for being on here and giving such a great presentation.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I know it's a long work day. I appreciate you guys sharing your time with me.
Right. Thank you.